Have you ever heard of the contract year phenomenon? Basically, when an athlete is on an expiring contract, they would have an extraordinary season, much better than any season they've had in the past, thus earning a massive payday. But then, right after signing that contract, their game would regress back to normal, sometimes drop off even further. A lot of players lose that hunger after getting a massive payday. But sometimes, it just happens naturally or due to other factors outside of their control. This happens across all sports, but today we're going to take a look at NBA players. 7 NBA players, specifically players in more recent years who fell off after signing a huge contract. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and let's get started. Number 7, Buddy Hield. In the 2018-19 season, Buddy Hield had one of the greatest shooting seasons of all time. It was almost Steph Curry-esque in terms of volume and efficiency. He was taking 8 threes a game and hitting 43% of them. It was his career high in scoring and trounced any previous season he's had before. Buddy was relatively young too, so the Kings rewarded him with a 4-year, $94 million deal. However, a few months later, things started to fall apart very quickly. In December, Hield accused the Kings of not trusting him anymore, after getting repeatedly benched late into the game. That season, he even lost his starting spot to Bogdan Bogdanovic, although eventually he would be back in the starting lineup. Unfortunately, while he was expected to continue this incredible trajectory he once had, it did not happen. As of today, he has yet to match that level of production. Over time, his role has changed and he's no longer the focal point he once was, relinquishing his duties to De'Aaron Fox. On the bright side, the Kings have been doing better overall as a team, so maybe it was a good thing. Number 6, Nick Batum. The summer of 2016 was known for a huge number of ridiculous, some would say unreasonable contracts being given out. But the thing with Batum was that he was a solid player and just had arguably his best season yet in Charlotte. Nobody had doubts whether or not he could perform. The question was, why did Charlotte give him superstar money? He signed a 5-year, $120 million deal for a role player averaging 15, 6, and 6. That was unheard of back then. At that time, he was also only 27 years old and expected to keep improving. However, Batum stagnated and steadily regressed throughout his years in Charlotte. It was a horrendous contract. Even if he did not have a breakout year, it was still a massive overpay. I mean, after his 2016 season, he did deserve a nice contract, but not this nice. At least it was better than Joakim Noah's contract, cause Noah got paid an absurd amount of money without even having a breakout year. He was already on the decline. Number 5, Evan Turner. Another player of the 2016 offseason, but Turner's situation was kinda different. Now, previously before joining the Celtics, Turner was viewed as one of those guys who put up empty stats on a bad team. He was the face of the Sixers during their worst years, tanking and purposely sinking to the bottom of the standings. Turner was drafted into a god-awful situation right off the bat, and he didn't have much to work with, cause his team was set up to fail. You can't do much when your team is trying to lose. In fact, back in the day, there were countless articles mocking him, cause he was so bad at tanking and people made fun of him for trying to win. The fans would sometimes boo him after he made a shot. That's just crazy, looking back on it. I can't believe that actually happened. So why did I mention this? It's to give you guys some context. Basically, for Turner's first few seasons, it was a crapshoot. It wasn't until he arrived in Boston where people started to think, wow, this guy can actually play. It was the first time of his NBA career where he played meaningful minutes on a winning team. Additionally, he, along with Isaiah Thomas, were huge pieces for the Celtics' turnaround, as they were supposed to be terrible after trading away Pierce and KG, but Turner was critical in keeping them afloat. His 2015-16 season was phenomenal, especially for a guy coming off the bench playing limited minutes. While statistically his raw stats were not super good, it was the most productive year of his career. Across the country, the Blazers, stunned at his newfound potential, really wanted him. Over the summer, they agreed to a 4-year, $70 million deal. And, yeah, right off the bat, it was clear he did not live up to that same energy and motivation he had in Boston. It just wasn't there in Portland. He didn't look the same, he didn't feel the same. Number 4, Aaron Gordon. Take a look at this. In the 2017-18 season, Gordon put up these numbers. From year to year, he made big jumps, and he was only 22 years old. So it's reasonable to assume he'd continue to get better. You would think so, right? Not necessarily. In the 2018 offseason, the Magic re-signed him to a 4-year, $80 million extension. At the time, it was a great contract, as Gordon was projected to be a star very soon. Sadly, since then, he has not matched that same level of production. What looked like to be a superstar in the making, it went in the opposite direction. Year after year, Gordon's numbers dropped, and on the court, he just seemed less and less interested. The upsetting part is, he's not even a bad player, he's still very good. We see from time to time he'd have a crazy game that makes us wonder, why can't he do that every night? Why can't he be a 25-point-per-game scorer? Athletically, physically, with a versatile offensive arsenal, he has the tools to do so. Defensively, he holds his own, and perhaps he doesn't get enough credit on that end. All those slam dunk contests at the All-Star weekends, that's like the only time we hear about him. As for every other time in the season, he's not bad enough to where we'd call him out for it, but he's not good enough for people to care. Gordon went from being one of the league's brightest young stars to being an average player after signing that contract. Number 3, Gary Harris. I was thinking whether or not to put Harris on this list, cause I know he suffered his fair share of injuries throughout the years. He's been healthy for a while though, and still hasn't lived up to what we expected. In the 2016-17 season, Harris had a breakout year. He went from an average shooting guard to a very good shooting guard. One of a handful of players in the league to average above 50% from the field and 40% from 3. Additionally, he suffocated opponents on defense, being the guy called upon to defend the opposing team's best perimeter threat. Afterwards, he signed a 4-year, $84 million deal. Harris continued to play well for a little bit, but starting in 2018, he slowly but surely dropped off. He went from an elite shooter to an average one, at best. Even with the organization having his back and encouraging him to keep trying, the Nuggets realized that they couldn't keep him much longer. Especially after such a terrible playoff performance in 2020. At one point, Harris, Murray, and Jokic were considered the future cornerstones of the franchise. And while 2 of them became that, Harris was left behind. Had he continued to play like he did back in 2017, perhaps he'd still be here. Number 2, Marcus Morris. Morris is a seasoned vet. Throughout his NBA career, he's been, more or less, a role player, a guy who starts or comes off the bench and do whatever the coaches ask him. But in half a season in New York, at the age of 30, Morris had a breakout year. Before getting traded to the Clippers, Morris led the team in scoring, putting up a career-high 19.6 points per game. Before that, he was never even close to being a 20-point-per-game scorer, but all of a sudden, he was. That season was the best he's ever had, even efficiency-wise, and it was clear that he was looking for one last fat payday. And he got it. The Clippers agreed to a 4-year, $64 million deal. Quite a lot of money for a guy like him. Of course, nobody expected him to keep putting up 20 points per game on a team with Kawhi and Paul George, but statistically his numbers have dropped off due to a limited role. Back to the usual 13 to 14 points per game he's always had. Granted, his shooting has still been very good though. It's just the concept of Morris earning himself a big payday from carrying the Knicks. I don't know why that's funny to me. Just a random role player leading the team in scoring and earning himself that much money. It's safe to say, if he didn't have that season with the Knicks, he'd probably be on the minimum, or pretty close to it. Maybe a mid-level exception, honestly. But hey, kudos to him. Number 1. Chandler Parsons. Yes. I don't think this needs much explanation, but I'll set up the scenario anyway. Chandler Parsons, on the Rockets, was a rising young star, a do-it-all small forward, the type of player every team wants. Maybe a little too much. The first major contract he signed was in Dallas. After a great year in Houston, Mark Cuban took a chance on him, and got him for a pretty good deal, actually. Although Dirk would tell you otherwise. Apparently, some of his money went to Parsons, so he forced him to pay for dinner on the road every single time. Anyway, this contract was good. 3 years, $46 million for a budding star like Parsons? That's reasonable. He did opt out after 2 years though, and it was this contract, offered by Memphis, that was really questionable. 4 years, $94 million for Parsons, who was also struggling with knee problems. Some even accused him of hiding the severity of his injury in Dallas and continuing to play through it, just because he knew he was going to opt out in search of a much bigger deal. Yikes, in hindsight, this is bad if he was really playing through it and keeping it from the team. The issue was, if Parsons was just injured and couldn't play, that's fine, but there were questions about Parsons' commitment to basketball as a whole. There was a running joke that Parsons averaged more Instagram posts per season than games played per season. Unfortunately, it didn't get any better for him. In early 2020, he was hit by a drunk driver and suffered injuries that could potentially end his NBA career. It was awful, and yet, idiots kept ragging him saying he deserved it for robbing the Grizzlies. Seriously? Nobody should wish anything like this on a person. Yeah, he didn't live up to the contract, but the Grizzlies were the ones who offered it to him. I don't blame him for securing the bag while he can. Anyway, those were 7 NBA players who fell off shortly after a contract season. Can you think of any other players in recent history who fall into this category? Let me know in the comments. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.